Coming to you from the Toby Family Auditorium at the Commonwealth Club, it's Week to Week, the political roundtable for Monday, May 6, 2019. So much has happened in the last almost month since our last program. Luckily, a lot of it has been online, such as Jerry Falwell Jr., who called online for reparations to be paid to the president because he lost 2 years of his presidency due to the Mueller investigation. It gets better. President Trump, not surprisingly, retweeted this and retweeted the call for his term to be extended by 2 years because of this time that was stolen. And this is true, he misspelled stolen with an extra L, which actually makes it Stollen, which means that the first 2 years of his presidency were a traditional German fruit bread made with nuts, spices, and dried or candied fruit, coated with powdered sugar or icing. So. I'm John Zipper, your sugar-coated host for Week to Week. On today's program, we're going to discuss the congressional confrontation with Attorney General Bill Barr. Any Barr. We'll also talk about Governor Newsom's water plans and other state news, the Facebook ban on a handful of extremist figures, and more. And of course, we'll send you off with our live news quiz. Everyone is welcome at the Commonwealth Club. Doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. You're welcome, and any opinions that are expressed up here are those solely of the speakers and not of the Commonwealth Club. So let's meet our panelists for today. We'll start at the far end of the stage with Chuck Nevius, that's C.W. Nevius. He's a columnist for the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, of course, former longtime columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. You can follow him on Twitter at C.W. Nevius. So welcome back, Chuck.
Thank you.
Next is Melissa Kane, political and legal reporter for CBS Bay Area. So welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you.
And next to me is Martin Reynolds, co-executive director of the Maynard Institute, also the director of the Reveal Investigative Fellows Program, and he's on Twitter at Reynolds Post. Welcome back. I think you all know that we have question cards spread throughout the room, so you know how to fill out some cards and they'll be picked up and delivered to me, and I'll work them into our conversation here tonight. But let's start with the news that pretty much headlined everywhere last week. Excuse me. Attorney General Bob Barr, not Bill, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
It's Bill.
Is it? I'm changing his name to Bob. I like it better. Someone who is claiming to be the Attorney General testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it was a very contentious exchange with the committee Democrats. Following that, Barr, I'll just call him, he then declared he was not going to testify before the House Judiciary Committee, and this spawned charges that he had lied to Congress and was covering up for the president. Now, as a result of Barr's refusal to serve up the uncensored version of the Mueller report to members of Congress, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler of New York prepared his committee to vote on a contempt of Congress proceeding against Barr. In response, the Justice Department has invited Nadler to negotiate. So let's start there, and I want to start with you, Melissa. Contempt of Congress, does that matter?
Not really. Not by itself. You know, well, you are in contempt. Well, okay. It doesn't mean anything, not intrinsically. What he's asking them to vote on is a move to actually have the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia bring a criminal case against Bill Barr for contempt. And so just declaring someone in contempt doesn't really matter. If you look at Eric Holder, for example, he was held in contempt by this is when the shoe was on the other foot, when we had a Republican-controlled House and a Democratic executive. So Eric Holder was held in contempt for refusing to turn over certain documents related to the Fast and Furious, investigation and issue. At that point, the House voted to hold him in contempt. You notice he didn't go to jail. He was just fine. Like, everything was fine. And they then sued him in federal court to get those documents. By the way, the case is still going on. right? We don't even know who won yet. It is still going on. The judge in that case ordered Holder to turn over documents in 2014 and then some more, I think, in 2016. But that's the thing about going through the federal civil process to enforce a subpoena. It takes forever and ever. So what they've asked right now is for the, again, the U.S. Attorney to institute criminal proceedings against Barr, which is a little different than what happened with Holder. Will the Department of Justice actually do that to the Attorney General? Maybe not. We're not sure if they're actually going to pursue that. But in any event, remember, if it's a criminal prosecution, that doesn't force you to turn over documents, right? That punishes you for not. So, and actually, it sort of takes away the incentive, right? Because you say, well, if I've already been convicted, then why would I turn them over? So it actually, I'm not sure really what they think is going to happen here. But let's assume he gets the maximum penalty, which I think is a month or two in jail and like a $10,000 fine. That doesn't necessarily disgorge the documents. You actually have to go through civil court to get that done, and that takes a long time. The bottom line is, for folks in Congress, you are very limited in how you can get a subpoena enforced. They talk a good game, and there's a jail in the Capitol, which there is not a jail in the Capitol. But we're going to handcuff him. No, you're not. It's not a thing. And so there's a lot of talk among Democrats, but the truth is they really have very little power to enforce a contempt, to enforce any issues when it comes to not answering a subpoena, especially against the lead person in the law enforcement role that he's in, because that would be his office that could potentially do something. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't see Bill in jail. I don't think that's going to happen. Somebody said the other day, how many deadlines has Jerry Nadler set so far? It's April 23rd and that's it, And they go, no. And he said, okay, the 26th. No. And who among us doesn't see how this is going to play out? And you can tell Melissa's an attorney because she laid it out so perfectly. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. And the actual reality is that the Congress sounds like they have a lot of power, but they don't really. They can keep this forefront. They can keep it as an issue for people to discuss. But, if Mnuchin said today, no tax returns, is anyone surprised by that? That's what they're going to do. It's going to be delayed. It's only another 2 years, not even that long. This is the way this is going to go. And it's an infuriating churn of events that really doesn't seem to get anywhere. And I think it's kind of the template for the Trump presidency.
Mm-hmm. And I think what stands out to me in this situation is just what's being lost in all of this, or perhaps overshadowed by process, is just the egregiousness of what we all uncovered, right? Barr comes out, gives a press conference that, everything's fine. He was actually just feeling very sadly about how his presidency was being portrayed, and it makes perfect sense that he would be upset, sort of completely kowtowing for the president, and when in fact there are signs that they welcomed the help of a foreign power to swing an election. How effective it was, we're not quite sure, but just the fact that an administration would welcome that there was clear, only by sheer virtue of incompetence was there not conspiracy for collusion, right? They tried, but they couldn't reach people. Folks like Carter Page and whatnot can't seem to figure out how to get back in touch with the Russians. So it just seems like for sheer incompetence were these not crimes. And then on top of that, you had people not willing to do what Trump asked, which could easily been construed as obstruction. So I just think we can't lose sight of how egregious and how unethical this administration has been from leading up to the election and since in efforts to try and quiet the help that they were happy to receive.
Well, and I do want to point out, too, that it's not just that the Congress, that the House has very little power to enforce this subpoena and act on this contempt vote, but also the president doesn't have all the power either. The president can't, for example, prevent Mueller from testifying. He's tweeted, no, I don't want Mueller to testify, but it's not clear he has any power to do that. Bill Barr has the power to do that potentially, but he has said, no, that's fine with me. And also now we have Don McGahn, who has been called and probably will have to testify. And it's not clear the president can prevent that either, although he'll have some attorney-client privilege issues to deal with. And so the president can't really direct all this and sort of make this as big of a sort of stall as he necessarily would like. There are some folks who are are going to testify potentially that he really can't stop.
The only thing I would say is, I don't know how many people read the Mueller report. I read the Mueller report. The first part is just blindingly hard to follow, so I kind of fell asleep. But I got to the second part, which is about obstruction, and it's actually fascinating. And that document is going to be hung in the halls of history for years to come, and people are going to go back and look at that. And as Martin said, we're talking about Don McGahn, where the president went to him and said, "You tell them that I never said to fire
Comey.
Comey.
Tell them I never said to fire Comey." And he said, "You did say to fire Comey." Well, I didn't use the word fire. So, well, but you still did. And then came back after that and said, "We want you to post-date a document saying that you never said, that I never said to fire Comey. And I want you to post-date it so we can put it in our files." And that's when McGahn said he was ready to resign. I mean, that's sworn testimony. And that's going to exist, as I said, in history for years. And those tweets will appear, they'll disappear. But down the road, this presidency is going to have a real legacy of dishonesty. And it's right there in the Mueller report.
And you mentioned the Bob Mueller, and it is Bob.
You're getting better, John.
Had to look it up and double check.
Referring to
Just call him
everyone.
William.
Thank you.
Everybody's Bill.
But Bob Mueller testifying, there's, I guess, a tentative date of May 15th, the Ides of May, in which he will testify, I believe, for the House
Ides of May.
Judiciary Committee. Donald Trump has come out against this, said Mueller should not testify, which is a bit confusing because the president has said that the Mueller report completely exonerates him. So unless he's afraid of being, exonerated too much, you would think he would welcome this. But I mean, so are we all like planning our May 15th around this?
Well, I think the
Clearing
great
the way.
thing, there was a story today in Politico that he completely blindsided his advisors by suddenly reversing and saying Mueller shouldn't testify. And their response was, let's just pretend like that didn't happen, okay? Let's just leave it alone, and that's what we've come to.
Well, I'm not sure, what Mueller's going to say. I mean, because to be clear, I mean, he seems so far to be so professional and so, concerned with keeping his own personal ideas out of it. Here's what they want to know. Do you think this was bad? Do you think this was obstruction? And he's going to say, I'm not answering that question, right? It wasn't my job to answer that question because we can't indict the president. He's going to say this. Everything that's in the report, he's like, you have 400 pages. I don't have anything to add to that. And to say, do you think this was okay? He's going to say, my personal opinions are irrelevant. And let's assume they get really mad about that and say, well, we're holding you in contempt because you won't tell us if you like this or not. Then you have to go to a court potentially and convince a judge, no, we really need to know whether he thinks this is okay. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to be a hard argument to make. So he knows that. And so, A, they're not going to be able to force him to give his opinion, and B, he doesn't want to. And so it's not clear to me what's even going to happen here. And by the way, he has not agreed to May 15th. They asked him to appear. He hasn't answered. So we don't even know if he wants to show up, even though he's been given the green light from his boss, ostensibly, in the form of Barr's agreement. But he may not even want to do it and may, sort of force them to be more clear and specific about what they want him to come and divulge. He may just say, look, you've got almost 500 pages of stuff. That's kind of all I have to say on that. And I just don't think he's going to stand up there and go, oh yeah, this president is terrible and should definitely go to jail. Like, that just doesn't seem like the kind of thing he's going to stand up there and do. I think he'll be very disappointing for a lot of Democrats when he actually gets there.
I meant to say it in the report, but I forgot. So I'll say it now. That's right. He is guilty of collusion.
But,
Yeah,
right, he's not going to say that. And then the other part is that, but he did send a letter to his boss saying what you said in that press conference didn't really contextualize my work. So it seems like there's some contention there. But I mean, Barr obviously Mueller is clearly a traditional prosecutor, very professional, as Melissa said, and is unlikely to be sort of the revelation that folks are hoping for. But at the same time, I do think that it's pretty telling that he would have communicated saying that the context of how you characterize this was questionable. But right now, it's like Mueller is like this enigma somewhere, probably sitting up with Sherpas, contemplating when he might come down from on high to give something for the Judiciary Committee to finally breathe from. And I just don't know that's going to happen. But I do find it interesting. I mean, and the other thing that really tripped me out was Rosenstein's resignation letter where I thought this whole time he was really, like, if I would have been him in that office and how bad Trump was talking about me, I would have been extreme. I just can't believe that the way he characterized, this is a privilege to have worked for you, Mr. President. And I was just like, did he look at Twitter over the last 2 years at all and see how badly this man was talking about him? So I don't know. So I actually don't know what's wrong with these people, period. Because if somebody's talking bad about you over here, somebody's mischaracterizing your work over there, and then what do you expect to get from them? I think folks probably expected too much, and what happened was not enough for the Dems to feel like they can move forward with some more strident approaches.
Well, again, it seems a little bit like because the report comes back and it's not what folks expected, right? It does not indict anyone. It sort of exonerates them of the underlying issue. And I think to some degree, the anger toward Barr is kind of like, well, we can get him. You know what I mean? Like, even though we're sort of really frustrated that we can't get the president, well, we can get that guy, and we can like try and put him in jail, and we could hold him in contempt, and maybe we can even impeach him, right? He can be impeached for your gross misconduct or whatever. Like, we'll get at him, and it seems like I'm not saying Barr hasn't done anything worthy of the ire of Democrats, but I am saying that it seems like there's a lot of pent-up energy that is being released in his direction as a result of the Mueller report and then his actions after that. Yeah.
A couple questions here from the audience, both about the tax returns. What would be the consequence if someone in the Treasury Department leaked Trump's tax returns? Why can't a journalist get a hold of Trump's tax returns? Are we talking criminal acts there, or?
Well, David K. Johnson got like 2 pages, and there was this like 90-minute wind-up on the Rachel Maddow show 2 years ago, and all of a sudden it came out, yeah, it was once again, there was nothing there. I'm like, really? I was sitting there with popcorn just coming out of my mouth, and it was like nothing. It was like 2 pages of nothing. So, it was that was so frustrating.
No, exactly. This is the presidency of expectations.
Yeah.
We're going to have this wonderful thing. Something's going to happen. You're going to be Arya. You're going to have the dragon glass. You're going to stab the Night King, and that's going to be it. And it's not happening, okay? We've had, I'll go back again to Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I mean, he said, we keep looking for this one thing that's going to bring this guy down. We've had incidents after incidents of terrible things, and it hasn't affected him. You know, Maureen Dowd wrote a thing Sunday, did you see it, where she was talking about, and I'm not sure I agree, but her idea is that someone like Mueller can be so fair and so even-handed and so down the middle that it actually tips the scale a little bit, because he didn't want to make a decision, to make a difficult call that could have an effect on the presidency and the government and the Constitution. Therefore, he played it down the middle. And her point is, Trump's not playing it down the middle.
Right.
You know, they're going as low as they can, and therefore they're losing. And it was a thinker. I'm not sure I'm on board, but yeah.
Well, the other part too, and I was thinking about this going back. I was talking to a colleague of mine who's an editor for Bloomberg, who's been really coordinating a lot of the coverage of this report. And I was asking that we were talking about, 2016 and just before that, and, that Obama, that administration was aware that this meddling was going on with the Russians, but then sort of being the statesman that he was seeking to be, didn't want to put the thumb on the scale. There was even time at the leadership at that time in Congress, there was talk about putting together this sort of joint statement, and McConnell didn't want to do it. And so as a result, nothing happened, right? So this situation, the effort to sort of be fair, I think in some ways you could argue even can harm democracy. Saying something that this is happening, they were trying to be so careful not to tip the scales for Clinton, not to look how they were playing favorites. And in fact, what ended up happening? It created, maybe, I wouldn't say that interference led to an election result, but it certainly continued to sow the level of tribalism and divisiveness in our society writ large that is certainly paralyzing our efforts to move forward on policy is what we really ought to be talking about.
That's exactly.
Well, but I have to say, I disagree. I'm an institutionalist. Like, I don't think the ends ever justify the means. This is 4 years in a more than 200-year history. If people don't like it, if people are on Mueller's side, then show it at the ballot box. Okay, This is the way that we do things. We don't tip the scales just to make it because we think our idea of fair is, sort of capital F, and that's not that's a difference. But that's just, whatever. We can all have our philosophical differences on that in terms of like, yes, there were attempts to be fair, but should we all be degenerate just to win?
No.
Does it,
No,
I mean,
no,
should
right.
should Barack Obama have entered in, had tried to do things?
Well, could
that,
there have been a way that he could have done it that was appropriate for the situation?
Right.
Potentially, yeah. No, I get you.
Yeah, that's all I mean. I
And I
don't
think
mean-
there's a lot of people.
And
like,
but, and again, I'm not sure I buy this whole thing, but Nancy Pelosi raises the specter that if Trump loses in 2020, he won't give up power.
look,
And that
listen,
is so far down the crazy town road.
that is not going to happen.
Well-
the only way you can keep power after your term is done is if the military is on your
That's
side.
right. That's
you
right.
need the guns.
But
if
it-
you don't have the guns, as we see in Venezuela, you don't have the power.
But is the-
and
but-
so as long as the military is willing to say, sorry, sir, we're going to drag you out of this big old White House kicking and screaming, and I think they are,
Right.
then we're good. Like, don't freak out. Like, forget his tweets. Like, the military is on board with the institutions and the Constitution. I don't think he has convinced a majority of them to put tanks outside the White House and
Quite
prevent
the contrary.
an orderly
actually.
transfer.
Quite the
of
contrary.
power.
And I yield to my colleague from San Francisco, but do we want to see that spectacle of someone being dragged out of the White House?
I don't know. I think some
I did,
people would.
well, no.
I feel like I need to answer that question, but I really kind of don't want to.
I know.
You on camera.
Yeah, I'm on camera.
That's the
That would be
staging
a
of it.
tragedy.
The staging of it
I mean,
becomes-
Well, of
But,
course,
but to answer the question, by the way, first of all, if a journalist could get those things, y'all, they would have been gotten. That is not a thing. Could someone leak them? Yes. And what would they get for that? Probably a ticker tape parade in the city of San Francisco. But it would be a federal offense, and there certainly would be some consequences. But it would seem to me that if they were leakable, if they were accessible by someone who could leak them, they would have been leaked by now. And so I'm not saying that wherever they are is airtight. I was actually surprised that in the Mueller report, it didn't refer to them. It seemed, I think a lot of folks were hoping that in the course of the investigation, he certainly could get them.
Right.
And then, expose something or even talk about them or say, we looked at them and there was nothing there. I mean, whatever. But I was kind of surprised that that wasn't part of the overall investigation.
Yeah.
well, and isn't there a bill headed toward Newsom's desk, Governor Newsom's desk, that would require anyone who wants to be on the presidential ballot in California to release their tax returns? Is that?
Yeah, but it's not useful here. It really isn't. It has to do with the presidential primary. So understand, if his only opponent is, what is it, William
Weld.
Weld?
William Weld. Or as I call him, Bob Weld.
You call him Bob.
Like, so
Willie
this, by
Bob
the way, so
Weld.
this is just to be on the presidential primary ballot. So whoever he could be left off our presidential primary ballot and still get the nomination, right? And then if he gets the nomination, he definitely gets to be on the general ballot. So it doesn't stop him from being on the November ballot. It would only stop him from being on the March ballot, which he, may not even care. You know what I mean? Like California, maybe, maybe not. Interestingly, it's the Democrats who might actually be more impacted by this because there are a number of Democratic candidates running for president who really need the California votes, who can't get the nomination without the California votes. And to go back to the Republican side as well, remember that the party really makes the rules when it comes to delegates. And so let's assume that, there's like 200 delegates that a person would be giving up by not being on the ballot in California. All the party would have to do is the day before the convention, release all the delegates from their obligations and allow the California delegates to vote for Donald Trump on the actual floor. So there's a lot of reasons why I don't think this is going to be effective at getting him to turn over his tax returns, just because of the constraints of both the party mechanisms and the fact that whoever the party actually nominates has to be on that November ballot, even if it's Donald Trump, even if it's somebody who hasn't turned over their tax returns. So again, I think the bigger impact here is actually going to be on the Democrats, some of whom have not turned over tax returns. I know Bernie Sanders finally did. I know Kamala Harris turned over a ton, but it really was going to force Democrats to turn over their tax returns more than President Trump, especially if he continues to only be challenged by William Weld, then I think he's going to be fine, and he's not going to need to be on our primary ballot necessarily.
Okay, well, let's move into our next topic, which is, in fact, some of the stuff in the presidential race. Former Vice President Joe Biden, of course, officially threw his hat into the ring and quickly moved well ahead of the other candidates. In a poll released today from Hill Harris X, I believe it's called, Biden had a 32-point lead over the second place Bernie Sanders, 46 to 14%. Pete Buttigieg was in third place with 8%, Elizabeth Warren in fourth with 7%. And Biden has moved quickly. He's courting African Americans in the South. Any thoughts on, actually, let's stick with that aspect, because with Biden going there, with Kamala Harris and Cory Booker both expected to do well with that demographic, do we have any sense of what role that very important base of the Democratic Party is going to go? Are they going to be a kingmaker or a queenmaker?
A queenmaker. I was surprised that he took on Trump right away. And he's one of the first to do that because conventional wisdom is we want to concentrate on other things, healthcare, education. And he took him on immediately. And it was kind of breathtaking that everybody went, whoa, oh boy, are we going to get into a thing here? He called him a clown. Can he sustain that? I don't know. But it had to give the other candidates pause to think that when he did that, the reaction was actually, we've been waiting for somebody to do that. We've reached the point with, like we said, about the whole idea of the Mueller investigation that Trump's advisors just said, we're just ignoring that. We're just pretending like that didn't happen. And they've done that so much that it's normalized such bizarre and irregular behavior that I think for a moment, Biden said something that people were like, oh yeah, right, I remember. This is not how presidents behave. I don't know that it will take him to the White House, but it was kind of a moment in the start of this campaign that may embolden other people.
Well, to a certain extent, it's not surprising because if he started with policy, given that now Bernie Sanders in his last run has pushed so much of the party platform to the left, that if he starts talking about healthcare, if he starts talking about college, and I mean, he may not even be as progressive on some of those positions as some of the other candidates, it seemed to me it made logical sense to actually go after Trump rather than start talking policy.
And it makes him look like a foregone conclusion. I mean, that's what a front runner does. Remember, Hillary Clinton didn't debate Bernie Sanders on the campaign trail. She debated Donald Trump and the Republican Party because, sort of like, it to some degree diminishes the other folks. You're just saying like, okay, so I'm going to win this and let's just move on. Right. But also, so Biden the other day, I think he was in South Carolina, but I can't be totally sure, but he was in his speech, and I think it was like 6 times he referenced his good pal, Barack Obama. I shouldn't say my pal, that's a little too colloquial. I should say the president of the United States, Barack Obama. I just like really kept reminding everyone that he is friendly with and was the VP for Barack Obama. And for a lot of folks, I think in the audience, and certainly folks, in South Carolina, they were pretty receptive. And there's, some great, he's got a little halo effect of that. People remember that as a simpler time. And so, he's really purposefully, I think, talking a lot about his friend Barack, and really invoking that to sort of help him with black voters.
And I think below the radar, he knows he's not going to get an endorsement from Barack Obama right now. And then he said, "I actually asked Barack not to endorse me," which I'm sure he did, right? Didn't we all think?
I didn't break up with him. No, he didn't break up with me. I broke up.
That's right.
Well,
It's not you, it's me. It's me. It really is.
He's doing what I call the brother adjacent move. and so I just, the big question I have for, these candidates is what are you going to do to help people of color in this country, right? Whether they're black, brown, what have you. There's huge wealth gaps that exist. And so, what I find interesting is that the conversation around how do you often help black voters, particularly in the media, often is with panels that actually don't have any people of color on them. And so I don't know how you're going to have a conversation about policy and debating that policy and how you approach it and without those folks involved. And so and the reality is that the issues that are facing black voters in America are similar that face all voters in America, right? Concern about health care, concern about jobs, concern about the cost of housing, concern about equity in society. Maybe that may not be the same for others, but so what I would like to see, one of my big frustrations, I think, with Obama, I mean, he was a true statesman, and actually I think he read the reports that came across his desk, so that was really refreshing, was that I think the criticism of his presidency was that he didn't do enough specifically for black voters, although he did focus on criminal justice reform, which was very important. So I think, and not to say that there should be more done from another group than others, although I think some folks would feel differently about that. But I think what's going to be important is, are you going to be able to articulate a policy that speaks to this constituency? I mean, to a great degree, there's a lot of criticism by conservative blacks that say, why should Democrats consistently get our votes when it's sort of taken for granted? So it remains to be seen which candidate is going to speak specifically, because I think there's a measure of fear. The one thing that I was really interested to see was how Elizabeth Warren was quite specific about the need for reparations for black people. And I was like, damn, she just came out and said it. And I think a lot of folks are not always willing to be that specific with policies that I think are perceived as controversial.
Well, the only thing I'd say about Biden, the only thing that concerns me about Biden is after this long Hamlet-like, deciding period where I will or I won't, I'm thinking, we've heard of the long goodbye, this is the long hello. We did the long hello.
Well, I touch you.
Oh, yeah, well, I touch you. After all this, somebody said, what about the Anita Hill hearings? And he fell apart. I mean, you still don't have a good answer for that, because that's going to be an important thing. And this touching thing is going to be an important thing. And you need to be ready to take that on and hopefully provide an explanation, which I'm not really sure we're going to have a good one with the Anita Hill hearings. So there's a lot of baggage there. He knows it. I'm sure he does. But I'd like to have seen a better rollout in the sense that you're getting these questions. Where are your answers?
So Senator Kamala Harris got some in the spotlight with the Barr hearing, trying to specifically pin him down on whether or not anyone from the White House had in any way indicated that he should prosecute somebody. How do you think she came off in that? I mean, she wasn't in the top 4 in that poll I cited earlier, but it's early days and anything can happen. She tends to impress folks when she gets in her prosecutorial mode.
I thought she killed it. I don't know what you guys think, but I thought she killed it. She had Barr sputtering. He didn't know what to say. He had to repeat the question. I mean, if she can be in if she could be in a courtroom every single time, she would nail it. I mean, that was sensational, I thought.
Well, yeah, being a district attorney in this city and then being the state attorney general for the state that this size. I mean, yeah, she's masterful in that regard. I guess the question will be, how is that going to translate in other parts of her campaign? But she's a very impressive person, and I think very intelligent, and has a great story and a great something I think to share, and an interesting history that sort of connects with folks. I guess my question is I wonder why she isn't doing quite as well. I think there's been this Buttigieg, he's so really interesting guy, so authentic and incredibly dynamic himself. I mean, very young, but I do question, why is it someone of her stature, her clear abilities, isn't polling better this early?
Well, I think as Willie Brown said, she's made a few missteps at the start. She's been very quick to take things on, and then some of those things turned out to be, whoa, maybe we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And that's not, my sense of her is she's cautious. Someone suggesting that you should try to do something, let's make a splash here. And that's the problem with making a splash. But that was a good moment.
She certainly, so there were 2 other candidates, that we know of, on the committee. You never know, every day. It's like, okay. So Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar, and she did so much better than either of them, for sure. And the reason she did well, you don't even have to watch, is you got a fundraising email 30 seconds after it was over that included the clip. like her social media team is amazing. So she was kind of proud of that. But she did do legitimately a good job. She got him to admit that she asked him, has anyone in the White House ever suggested to you that you investigate anyone? And he was like, what do you mean by the word suggest? And she just starts listing, she becomes a human thesaurus. And she's like, imply. Infer, look at you. You know what I mean? And he was like, what? And finally she got him to say, I don't know, which was interesting. And then the next day she asked the Department of Justice to look into whether that actually ever happen. But and it seemed really disingenuous that like maybe you didn't know, or maybe you could. And look, in that moment, she was the last one. Remember, she's the most junior person, so she's the last one to ask questions. Maybe he's tired. He could have said, "Let me think about it and get back to you." But he didn't do that. He said, "I don't know." And that seems a little different than like I'm being put on the spot and I can't think of the answer at this moment, which I think would have been a legit answer. But instead of doing that, he just said, "I don't know what you mean by suggest, and I don't know." And that was right out the gate.
Oh, yeah.
And so the president then later said, "Oh, I'm sure Kamala Harris was really nasty to him." And so immediately, nasty woman fundraising stuff, T-shirts, already being printed, really taking advantage of that. So I will say, of all the candidates on the committee, she certainly did, really grab that moment and go with it. And in fact, she sits next to Cory Booker, and he's sitting next to her, like so hard not to laugh and smile.
Yep.
Like there's total gifs of him, like, like. It's sweet. They're clearly friends. He was clearly happy for her and happy with what was going on. But she seemed to be the only candidate who really recognized that was a moment that you need to just sort of grab and take. And every news story on TV used the clips from her.
Yep. Colbert said she was the star of the hearings. I mean, that's just, you can't get better than that.
Yeah, whether it translates at the polls, I don't know.
And what it says to me is this primary is going to be decided on debates. When they get those people on the stage, that's when we're going to start to say, I like what he said, I like what she said, I didn't like what we're going to start to see it. It's just so difficult because we have the soundbite moments, and that was a great one for Kamala. I mean, you can't beat that, but how do you do that?
Right in her wheelhouse too, so she got an opportunity.
Yeah.
Although I'm nervous about the debates. Now they're doing two like 10 people debates.
Yep.
I mean, think about that. I mean, let's assume there's no commercials, there's no introductions, and there's no time for questions. Still, everybody gets 6 minutes. Like, how are you supposed to, unless you walk out there wearing a clown suit and then set yourself on fire, like, what are you going to do in that 6 minutes to get yourself from a 1% to a 15%?
Actually, that's Elizabeth Warren's plan.
Is that her plan?
She's actually going to do that.
Yeah, especially now that so much of the policy positions, seem sort of on a continuum, right? It's not like Bernie Sanders when he was coming out with his hair flaming and just like, free everything for everyone. And then it was like, people were like, what? So I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and now he's like, everybody's taking my plan.
Right. He's like,
what are we going to do?
I've been saying this for years.
Let's move here to the state of California. And Governor Newsom recently, we've already seen him downsize or slow walk Jerry Brown's high-speed rail project. Now he has downsized Brown's twin tunnel plan to transport water from North to South California. So let's talk about this. The original plan was estimated to cost $16 to $19 billion, according to estimates I've seen. It would have built two 35-mile-long tunnels under the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta to transport this water. That would now seem to be kaput. They were now going with a one-tunnel plan that will be about $10 billion, according to what I've seen. And I guess some environmental groups are happy about this, and Los Angeles city leaders are not. Any thoughts on this? Was this, do you think,
Gavin Newsom is a pathological newsmaker. He's unbelievable with making news. He just is. I went to an election, post-election party one time, and he was there, and you could track him by looking where the TV cameras were. Wherever he was, there was a TV camera talking to him. And he seizes on these things like that, big ideas, big projects. The high-speed rail is another example. This death penalty thing, he made an executive order. We're not going to have any more death penalty, which has hints of same-sex marriage. It's a big idea. It's the kind of thing that you do. It attracts attention. That's Gavin Newsom. And someday we may be seeing Gavin Newsom on a much bigger stage.
Martin?
Yeah, well, and I also think that, I used to work for Bay Area News Group, and the Delta was a big coverage issue there. The Delta smelt and how the environment has been impacted by these pumps, right? The salmon trying to get upstream. So this is obviously a big issue. Also, when the whole drought was happening in the San Joaquin Valley, the farmers were really boring down into the ground to extract all of this groundwater, which actually caused the ground to sink. and has really, has caused some damage to infrastructure. So I think, there was this, I was telling folks back there that there's this quote that's attributed to Mark Twain, talks about how whiskey's for drinking, but water's for fighting. And I think that without a doubt in this state, water is a big issue. It's a big fight. There's a lot of constituencies at play. There's, of course, the notion that, we've got the hetchy, everybody else beat it. I think Melissa was saying. And so, we got what we need. Why don't you go work it out down there? But I think the big issue here is also, it's important to note too, and there was one thing I was looking at when I was looking for this, and this is pretty interesting about this notion of saving water. So apparently in Israel, 80% of the water that's flushed down the toilet is recycled and used for agriculture. Now, how much do you think that we use for that in that regard here? In California, it's only 8%. So in other words, we need to start tinkling into the tulips and start growing some things with that water. So there could be some strategic ways to approach that.
You got to trademark that.
That's good.
Tinkling to the tulips.
That's good.
Yeah,
We used to tiptoe, but now we're going to tinkle.
that's all I got for you.
That's good. That's good.
What about Governor Newsom's move on the executive order on
Death penalty.
death penalty? That certainly also, again, got a lot of people saying great and others saying, hey, we just kind of voted on this.
Well, I think Chuck's point is well, in the sense that I think it's an important, for many people, his position has been that the death penalty is inhumane, and then, 4% of the people who end up getting the death penalty are wrongly convicted, right? And so that's not something you can circle back around from. Also, it costs billions of dollars to go through all of the appeals process that happens in this as well. And then we also know that the death penalty is disproportionately applied to people of color. So in many ways, there is a social justice component to this. And this is not to by any means sort of to denigrate or put aside the feelings of people who've had loved ones, right, who have been killed and likely as a result, and therefore their perpetrators receive the death penalty. It's not to cast that aside at all. But I think given what we know about the injustices and the imbalance of how the criminal justice system and how justice is meted out in our society, I think this is an understandable approach to take from a very progressive governor.
Okay. I also would note Governor Newsom's, and I think it might be part of his new budget plan or something, is talking about how much health care will be given to undocumented immigrants. Already, I guess, undocumented immigrants up to the age of 19 are covered by state programs, and he would raise it to 25. And there are other Democrats, of course, in Sacramento who want to expand it even more. But I was reading what I think the Sacramento Bee today was reporting, how there are some health officials in the state who are saying, wait a minute, you're taking that from, STD programs and some, things that would deal with measles outbreaks and things like that to go and because the state is basically saying we will be providing this and therefore you won't need this other money, so we'll just take that to help pay for this. But of course that doesn't all equal up and doesn't all go to the same counties that are making that.
But I think we do know that Gavin Newsom has been chomping at the bit as a lieutenant governor under Jerry Brown. And when he first got the job as lieutenant governor, I happened to do an interview with him, and he had this idea that he went to Jerry Brown's office, and he had this plan that he was going to create this commission. It was going to work on homelessness and housing, and it would get some of the top people in the state, put them all together. He would chair the commission, and then they would bring their findings back to Jerry Brown and give them to him. And Jerry Brown said, why don't you go back to your office and preside over Congress and leave me alone? And he said, he was very, very candid about it. It was a moment for me to realize the lieutenant governor's job is not to make policy, and that's what he loves to do. So given this opportunity, he will go in many different directions. As we've said many times, he has 1,000 ideas. Let's boil it down to 10. Try to stick with those. That'd be good. But yeah, he's definitely someone who wants to make waves.
And and one last point about this too, is I recall there was one other person with really nice hair some years ago that ended up really making waves in this regard and came out of this state to go to some house that's white. So different party, but we'll see what happens.
Took me a while to follow that trend.
Who was that?
Work with me. Reagan,
Oh, all right.
nice hair.
Nice hair. All right.
Okay.
He had really nice hair.
I do think we should at least note the synagogue shooting in, is it Poway? Am I pronouncing that correct? Poway. Thank you. In Southern California, where a gunman had killed one person, injured three, including the rabbi. This past Friday, for their Friday night services, they were packed, standing room only. Now, around the same time as the Poway attack, a 26-year-old former U.S. Army soldier was charged with plotting terror attacks in L.A., planning to detonate explosives at a white nationalist rally. And I found it interesting that the attack on churches in Sri Lanka on Easter were reportedly carried out by a group enraged by the attack on Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand. The Christchurch, New Zealand attacks were apparently committed by someone who was supposedly doing it in response to terrorist attacks committed by Muslim terrorists around the world. And there was an LA, and this LA attempted terrorist was someone who was reportedly trying to avenge attacks against Muslims around the world. So we're seeing this in like high speed. All this stuff happened within.
The cycle continues.
Yeah.
And internationally.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's just unbelievable.
You know, I don't think we can discount the level of vitriol coming from the highest office in the land, or the person that holds the highest office in the land. I mean, we know that the level of hate crimes has increased in the teens over the last 2 years. I don't think that is a coincidence. When you have a president of the United States who speaks the way he has in the rallies he did leading up to his election, talks about white supremacists as in Charlottesville as being some nice people. It's almost like being a newspaper man and writing a 12-inch story about the Holocaust and giving the Nazis 6 inches to espouse their views, right? I mean, it's just not something you would do. So I think that I think this cannot be discounted. Granted, it's international, but I think extremists have been emboldened by the rhetoric of the President of the United States, and I think we just have to be real about that.
I'm not sure I agree with that. There's an old South Park episode, the 9/11 episode of South Park. I don't know if you've ever seen that, where they're trying to figure out like who caused 9/11, right? They're talking about like the 9/11 truthers, and they find out at the end. Sorry, this is a very old episode. I'm spoiling it. At the end, they find out that the CIA is actually trying to make people believe that it was an inside job, because it would mean they're competent. And so at the end they go, we want you to believe we did this secretly because like that would mean we're amazing. Like we pulled this thing off. Like that's crazy. I think to some degree, we sort of give the president too much power and credit. When you say, that somehow a bombing in Sri Lanka is related to something he said at a rally in Alabama, I'm not sure that there's a connection between that, or that even without President Trump, let's say Hillary Clinton was elected president, if everything would be fine. You know what I mean? We wouldn't have any of these things. Like it's hard to know. It's hard to know the negative of what's happening here. But I just caution, the tides. He doesn't control the tides or the setting of the sun. You know what I mean? Like let's be careful about how much, because when you say he emboldens like some dude in Sri Lanka, like
I'm not necessarily saying he emboldens
yeah.
Sri Lanka,
but I just mean like I feel like it gives him, it almost gives him too much power.
Yeah.
He is president because people voted for him, and I think there was obviously a zeitgeist he tapped into, and so he as a human, I don't think is the one emboldening people or creating this environment. I think the environment was there. That's why he's president. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like so, it's not. I would just caution against saying it's him as opposed to the world we live in.
Well,
let's not make him, the king of the world.
And actually, if I could just take this actually into the next topic that we wanted to talk about, because I think they're related or could be, and that is Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Laura Loomer, Paul Joseph Watson, Paul Nealon, and Louis Farrakhan were permanently banned from Facebook and Instagram. Instagram's owned by Facebook. These are all extremist voices on one thing or another. What I'm getting at is more kind of an all-around mix of an environment in which the people who are spewing hate or even intentional confusion of one sort or another have megaphones that are A, making them money in some cases, B, making Facebook and YouTube and others money.
And building their brand, certainly. Yeah.
Which is also to say that some of these people may not even believe what they're saying.
Yeah. I'm not as I'm concerned about the extremists, and that's a terrible, terrible thing. And if they get any comfort or release from that. But my concern is when I go to dinner sometimes with a different group of people, someone will say something like, well, I probably shouldn't say this. This isn't very PC, but, and then they say something that's offensive. And I feel like that's what the president's given you, is he's giving you that license to say something, you know it's over the line. You know you really shouldn't be saying this. And I would go back to what Melissa said, because this guy's tweeting all kinds, I don't know if you saw it, but he just tweeted about the Kentucky Derby. And he said it was ridiculous. They overturned the Kentucky Derby. They're so PC. All I can think is he was upset the horses weren't white. What does he care about? What does he care about the Kentucky Derby? I mean, this is just a scattergun of opinions that go out. You can't talk him out of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, but he's the president of the United States. And I think, Melissa, I would push back a little bit on this notion that he's not the kingmaker. He's not, he doesn't cause the sun to come up, but he is the quote unquote leader of the free world. And what the president of the United States says and the dog whistles that he has been blowing for the last 2 years cannot be understated. And yes, it's not going to necessarily mean that any old person is going to go do these things. I mean, America's had these issues simmering for quite some time. But it certainly emboldens, it certainly empowers, it's certain the people who are unhinged and can think, oh my goodness, all of a sudden, when he says that extremists in Charlottesville who are walking, yelling anti-Semitic slogans about how we will not be replaced and says that they're good people on both sides, that is an affirmation to people who are extremists. And I think it does result, and it's not just for some reason that these hate attacks have risen in the last 2 years. What would we attribute that to?
Well, I don't know that hate
crimes.
Convictions for hate crimes have risen. I know reports of hate crimes have risen, and
Right.
that's not the same thing. If more people are just aware and are reporting things as hate crimes, that is not the same thing as hate crimes actually happening and being convicted, and a jury or a judge finding that they actually happened. And I'm not denying that it is or isn't. I'm just saying, one number, that number doesn't equal
Like Me Too. Like
more hateful things.
We've had a lot more reports.
necessarily
of
happen.
people.
But in terms of Facebook, it's what's weird is why now, right? Alex Jones said that Sandy Hook was a conspiracy in 2013, and he wasn't banned from Facebook then, right? We don't understand why now. We don't understand who else is on this list, right? They banned these guys permanently for life. And I'm not saying they didn't deserve it, but I am saying, number one, permanently. So, if they turn over a new leaf, do they get to petition to Facebook court to say, please let me back on? I swear I will not be, mean again. So there's sort of that issue. And then who else is on this banned list that we don't know about because they're not public people? And then there isn't any sort of place we can go and say, okay, these are all the folks that aren't allowed back on this website, and here's why. And so, again, I'm not defending the folks who were banned, but I am saying it's an example of the extraordinary power that Facebook has to ban people with or without telling you, and to ban people with or without telling you why, because we still don't know why. I mean, generally these are, folks who, who are really controversial, but we don't know exactly what they just did. Why today? Why this week did this happen? What exactly precipitated this? We still don't know. That seems pretty arbitrary and secret in a way that is still pretty scary for folks who are, for a company that has created an ecosystem of folks who are making money from it, and they encourage that, and they want people to be dependent on it. And then there's this black box where, banished people go, and we don't know who's in there, and we don't know why.
I think we do know why. We know why because Mark Zuckerberg has been put on a spit and turned over a campfire because the data got out. And it's a classic case. I mean, we talk so often about startups and the new economy where we just go fast and break things. We just do things and see how it works out. Well, Facebook ended up to be one of the great data collectors of all time. And they've got data on all of us, if you're in Facebook, that is unbelievable. And they began to, as Martin said, try to find a way to monetize that. And they weren't as careful as they should have been. And now they're on an apology tour. They are trying. We're trying. We're really trying hard. I'm serious. We're really trying. We banned Alex Jones. They've got to make some. But this story has gotten so far ahead of them. I don't know if Facebook makes it back.
Well, also, in the scale of what we're dealing with here, I mean, sometimes you just don't understand. There's like 2 billion people that are on Facebook. Mm-hmm. How are you going to hire a number of people necessary to sort of police that? Mm-hmm. Same thing with YouTube. I mean, the numbers that we're talking about here are just astronomical. And also, in some places, in parts of the country, the other thing that's really important is that Facebook has become a source of news and information for people in places where there are news deserts. Mm-hmm. And so there's this other issue, too, that sort of, it is a very vital ecosystem that provides a lot of information and connectivity, but at the same time, it's completely gotten away from them. And so I agree with Chuck saying that it's an apology tour, and I also agree with Melissa that, so what's up with this black box? And once you start banning people, what does that mean? Who gets to make that determination? And as a journalist, my big concern of what has happened in these last number of years is, there's this great democratization, right, that the internet has provided our society, and also has provided people who want to contribute to the narrative, tell stories, and to be a contributor, right? The barrier to entry to be a publisher or purveyor of information has been wiped away, right? Used to be newspapers, used to be television stations. Now people can just jump in. The challenge then becomes is that what has that then led to? And so I think what we all have to be mindful of as well is that what has led to is that Google, Facebook have become the most powerful platforms, because no one even uses Bing. And as a result of that, they are able to control this ecosystem and the money that often flows to credible news organizations that are there to provide accurate news and information. So there's a lot to consider here. And I think banning people on an apology tour, I mean, who's the arbiter of free speech in America? Is it going to be Facebook? Is it going to be Google? Or is it going to be us?
Talking about data that they have and how they use it, I remember seeing stories a few years ago that was part of this whole giving Facebook a self-inflicted black eye, and that was like people, white nationalist organizations being able to target advertisements that they would put out by, people who think Jews are running the world, or, who hate black people or something, and they had that data, they served it up. Oh, you didn't want us to. And kind of like just the opposite of that, I recently have been getting a ton of ads served up on my Facebook feed for T-shirts. I have no idea why. It's like I haven't searched for T-shirts. So you click on this little thing saying, why am I seeing this ad? And it said, this advertiser has been looking for people who are over the age of 18 and live in or have been to the United States. It's like, okay, you can't get more vague than that.
Although they do keep serving up shoe ads for me that I do end up clicking through.
There you go.
Big data works in some cases and not in others. Before we get to the news quiz, I did just want to spend a few minutes talking about Ellen Tauscher. She's the former representative from the East Bay, U.S. representative from the East Bay. She passed away last week. She was an arms control expert who later served as an Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs under President Obama. Any thoughts? I mean, you're from the East Bay. She represented that area.
I think you two know her better than I, but I was in Walnut Creek. I lived in Walnut Creek when she was representing us, and I met her a time or two, and it's damning with faint praise, but I never would have guessed that she was as accomplished as she was, because she was so down to earth. Mm-hmm. She was so easy to talk to. She seemed like just a regular person. And as we were saying earlier, I mean, she was the youngest woman ever to have a seat on the stock exchange. I mean, she was her life was remarkable. And yet, I think she never lost that touch that made her electable and made her remarkable.
There was a saying about her being so close to her constituents that in her hometown whenever 3 people would gather, one of them was Ellen Tauscher.
So on near election day, Dianne Feinstein went to City Hall to cast her ballot because she wasn't going to be in the city on election day. She'd be in D.C. She came a little early, and there was a little press gaggle. So we're there with our cameras, and Ellen Tauscher was there, and so we asked Dianne Feinstein some questions, but we asked Ellen Tauscher some questions because she had been involved with the House, with the Democrats' retaking of the House. She was big on fundraising and helping to organize that whole effort. I don't know if you guys know this, but she was really, really integral to the effort to take those Orange County seats and flip another couple seats in the state of California. And I interviewed her about this issue, and first of all, she looked amazing. You would not guess in any way that she was sick at all. We were stunned to hear that she had passed. She seemed perfectly healthy. Again, this is back in November. But she was really calm. And I said, "Aren't you freaking out?" Because we were getting all the early ballots, and like young people were not turning in early ballots, and we were going, the numbers are not showing what you need to happen is happening. And she just smiled and said, "Nope, I think it'll be okay." And it was just totally cool. But she was very involved right until the end. She was. I hope people understand that she was really active and critical to that effort, at least in California, for the Democrats to take some of those House seats, and was just a stateswoman right up until months before.
And I think to that point too is that she co-founded the organization You Draw the Line 2021, which is seeking to champion independent and nonpartisan redistricting commission to resolve what's described as a constitutional crisis about how congressional districts are gerrymandered. And she sought to do this in a bipartisan way. So I think at a time when there's so much tribalism politically, the way she approached this issue that is really one about the Constitution and the sort of the validity of our electoral system and how things are supposed to be and supposed to work, I think that speaks volumes to her character.
I should also mention she was a member of the Commonwealth Club Board of Governors, and I had the pleasure of interviewing her once for a short documentary we made on civility and political dialogue, and I was just pleased to discover it. And very smart, but also very sharp sense of humor, and I loved that. So rest in peace, Ellen Tauscher. Well, we'll have more news quiz questions and, of course, much more to discuss on our next Week to Week program on Thursday, May 23rd. Thank you to our great panel today, Martin Reynolds, Melissa Kane, Chuck Nevius. Thanks to all of you here in the room and everyone listening and watching online. Have a great rest of your week.